Then, as this morning on the dock, again I saw, as if for the first time in my life, the impeccably straight streets, the glistening glass of the pavement, the divine parallelepipeds of the transparent dwellings, the square harmony of the grayish-blue rows of numbers. And it seemed to me that not past generations, but I myself, had won a victory over the old God and the old life. Modern science, which displaced and replaced God, not only removed the obstacle but also created a vacancy. The office of the supreme legislator cum manager, of the designer and administrator of the world order, was now horrifyingly empty. It had to be filled. The dream of an embracing order and harmony remained as vivid as ever, and it seemed now closer than ever, within human reach.
Maps display the aspects of a complex world that the mapmaker wants to exhibit and ignores everything else. The transformative power of a map lies within the power of the creator. In this video we shall discuss the possibility of creating a map that improves society and the human conditions.
Now that we know what high modernism is, let's look at the elements of high modernism. The first element can be simply stated as the aspiration to the administrative ordering of nature and society. This means creating an improved state for the entire society in all aspects of living. The second element is the unrestrained use of power to achieve the improved designs of high modernism. The third and the last element of the state development is a weakened society that lacks the resistance power. This is the environment on which to build the desired state in high modernism. This element tells why high modernism requires radical authority, which is discussed further in detail.
Before moving further, first let's get to know what is high modernism. Referring to the Seeing Like a State, a book by James C. Scott, this book explores what Scott calls high modernism, essentially the effort to use science and theory to order and regularize the social world, and to use theories of the future to remake the present. Scott defines high modernism in these terms: it is best conceived as a strong, one might even say muscle-bound, version of the beliefs in scientific and technical progress that were associated with industrialization in Western Europe and in North America from roughly 1830 until World War I. At its core was a supreme self-confidence about continued linear progress, the development of scientific and technical knowledge, the expansion of production, the rational design of social order, the growing satisfaction of human needs, and, not least, an increasing control over nature.
The Age of Enlightenment is closely related to high modernism. Age of Enlightenment was a cultural movement using reason to reform society by challenging traditional ideas. People following this movement looked rationally at human institutions as well as nature. To put another way, the thinkers of Enlightenment were influenced by scientific revolutions and believed in science and reason in order to question the traditional ideas of doing things. This thinking led to the discovery of society under a whole new light. The discovery of society in this way created new ideas and beliefs. Enlightenment thinkers wanted to challenge the old way of thinking. They believed in promoting science, skepticism, and intellectual interchange. They wanted to create an order to the community and suppress and obscure customs and practices as they were not rational in the mind of the Enlightenment thinkers. At the core, the Enlightenment thinkers believed that the purpose of the state was to improve health, skills, education, longevity, productivity, morals, and family life for all members of society. They wanted to design a social life that would minimize the friction of progress. The social engineering of the state is authoritarian in nature, thus the radical authority of high modernism is exemplified. High modernism is associated with industrialization in Western Europe and North America in mid-19th and early 20th century. In the 19th century, science and industry were major contributors to transformations. During that time, cotton and wool textile were revolutionized. Factory mindsets were now applied to design of society as a whole. Steam power and other new mechanical devices made production much easier and more efficient. Transportation advances such as railroads made business easier, faster and more profitable, which benefited the society. Mass-produced commodities made prices cheaper and easier to produce. These are the examples of how science and technology contributed to society. The 20th century brought the idea of re-engineering the entire society to implementation through creating improvement to society. After the depression of the 1930s, societies began experimenting with social and economic planning in an effort to relieve economic distress. The birth of 20th century high modernism occurred with the German mobilization of First World War. Walther Rathenau was the most closely associated figure with planning during the war. During the war, the Germans realized the key to sustain the war was planning and rationing the raw materials and the transport of those raw materials. After the war was over, the world realized what could be accomplished with constrained resources during wartime and also began envisioning what more could be accomplished if the same energy and planning were focused on popular welfare rather than wartime efforts. This productivism had at least two distinct lineages. First one is North American lineage. An American contribution came from the Frederick Taylor, who invented the concept of assembly line that permits the unskilled labor and control over the pace of production and labor process. Second one is European lineage, which focused on standardized workers with uniform physical capacities and needs and treated the worker as a machine that must be well fed and kept in good working order. The radical authority of high modernism promotes the viewpoint that there must be a true break with history and tradition, that the past is a hindrance that must be passed and the present is a platform for planning the future. It promotes the improvement of the human condition using the authority of the scientific knowledge, however, it also disallows any other competing sources of judgment. It strongly believes only those with the scientific knowledge are fit to rule in the new age, and those who do not abide the scientific knowledge should be left behind. High modernism ought to appeal greatly to the classes who have most to gain in status, power, and wealth. The position according to them is not just for rule and privilege but also responsibility for the great work of nation building and social transformation.
If we put the developments of high modernist belief in their historical context, and ask them who are the enemies of high modernism, then we found that they are within the society only. Like doctors and public health engineers, who did possess new knowledge that could save millions of lives, were often opposed by popular opinions and non-changeable political interests. Urban planners who could redesign urban housing to be cheaper, healthful, and more convenient were blocked by real estate interests. Inventors and engineers who had devised revolutionary new modes of power and transportation faced opposition from industrialists and laborers. Despite the authoritarian temptations of high modernism, they have often been resisted. Three factors seem decisive. The first is the existence of a private sphere of activity in which the state may not interfere, like health, sexuality, mental illness, sanitation, and strategies behind them. The second factor is the private sector in liberal economy. Economy driven by private market were far too complex to manage by a hierarchical administration. The third factor is the existence of political structure where a resistant society could make its influence known. So, high modernists must accommodate themselves to local opinion in order to avoid being voted out of power.